Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you, Carasoft, providing this opportunity. Afternoon. Today, I'm going to kind of walk through a few different items. So first, kind of do a deep dive on what breach records, what compromised records are, kind of different types, what kind of info they contain, who uses them and how they're used, where you can find them, and then we'll kind of walk through a interesting use case we had, kind of tracking down the head of the largest malware operator in the world. So as Ali mentioned, my name is Matteo Tomasini. I'm the founder and CTO of District 4 Labs. Previously, I was the managing director and practice lead at Prescient, a consulting firm. Before that, I was at Bluevoyant, a cyber intelligence firm. And then before that, it came to intelligence. And kind of the connecting thread has always been kind of investigations, in terms of dark web as well as cyber investigations. So breach data is just kind of a fact of life at this point. You've probably received the notices in the mail letting you know that your account wherever has been compromised, signing up for monitoring service, whatever it is. So the number of incidents is constantly increasing as more and more systems go online. Especially during COVID, when a lot of organizations that previously weren't online had to go online. So you saw a huge jump in breaches then, or with certain geopolitical issues, right? When the Russia-Ukraine war started, you saw a huge jump in breaches from those respective countries. Same idea with Israel and Palestine. Really, as you can probably imagine, every sector is impacted by breaches. Whether it's pharmaceutical, banking, even cybersecurity firms are compromised. Schools, hospitals, and of course, individuals are sometimes targeted, as in the case in sealer logs, which we'll talk about in a minute, or if you sign up for an account on a certain website. So, what kind of records or what kind of data is found in breached records? It's really anything you can think of. You'll have stuff like personal identifiers like birth dates, social security numbers, home addresses, phone numbers, emails, family information. You might find financial information like credit card numbers, bank account numbers, transaction histories, because we have a lot of credit card transaction information as well. Authentication information, of course, so username and password or email and password that someone used to log into a website. Health information, so insurance details, other medical information, employment information, really anything you can think about a person. And you can take this information and obviously learn a lot about them, right? So obviously you can learn, from addresses, where they're located, or there's breaches from different airlines or train companies. So where travel records might have been compromised. So see where they flew to or who they flew with. Obviously their interests, right? You can get a sense of what they might be interested based on the type of website that they signed up for, or maybe they even list their interests, when they're, in their bio of a certain website that's been compromised. Affiliations, so the corporate affiliations, affiliations with different organizations, financial affiliations, obviously different PII, right? The birthdays, phone numbers that you can use to, locate an individual, learn more about them. You can use this data to corroborate information that you might already have. Like you might have a sense that, this, subject X's birth date is, this month and year, or, have a sense they lived maybe in China or in Russia at a certain period of time. But, you don't know for sure because public records in that jurisdiction aren't that great. You can look at breach data and see that, they ordered, a pizza 20 times, using Yandex Foods, in Russia to this particular address. You can get a sense of, corroborating information that you might already have. You can learn a lot about their assets. We mentioned, kind of bank account numbers and, vehicle license plate numbers. So in addition to obviously knowing their bank account number, you also know they have an account at, Bank X, or they own, you can do a VIN lookup, and, because we have a lot of VIN numbers and license plate numbers, you learn, all right, what make and model is attached to that vehicle identification number. Or, if they're part of a breach of boatowners.com, you can assume that they have a boat. Or, there's been private airline records that have been compromised with tail numbers, so you can learn, whether they have an aircraft for, certain executives. And then, of course, cyber and physical risks, right? understanding what data is out there for an individual, for a company that could impact their physical or cyber risk, has been, very interesting. In terms of, ethical legal implications of using this data, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, I can't give legal advice, but the important things are that, trust the source of your data, that you understand and are comfortable with kind of the potential, let's say, whitish areas of using compromised data, and that you follow your kind of local legal standards. So really, it's, making sure that data integrity is there. Some organizations will remove data that's associated with politically exposed people or with certain threat actors. Just so you know, District 4 Labs, follows Department of Justice guidelines on how we source the data, how we collect the data, who we offer the data to, how we store the data, GDPR compliant, et cetera. And then, of course, we're providing as much context as possible so you understand where the data is coming from. So it's not just enough to say, this data exists. We want you to know exactly where the data is coming from. In terms of who uses this data, a lot of people on this call, right? Law enforcement, corporate investigators, cybersecurity, journalists, pen testing. Anytime you're really looking to investigate a person, this data is going to be useful. Particular use cases, my threat attribution, right? Understanding who's behind an online account, who's behind an email address, who's behind a crypto wallet, who's behind a Telegram account, a Facebook account, whatever it is, you can use this data very efficiently and very effectively. So you can kind of pivot from, here, like a Telegram ID to a compromised record, which might have an email address, and then, do another search, find a new compromised record that has maybe their name and their address and their, user information. So very, very, very valuable, especially when you consider that a lot of people assume that the data that is in Darkside will never be public, right? This is data that they entered into a website to create an account. It's data that they maybe entered on an ongoing basis for a certain social media profile, et cetera. So it's data that just people don't expect to be private or public rather. And what's great is, especially if you have such a massive repository of data like Darkside does, where you're going back 20 years, you can really do interesting work, right? Because you could be looking at maybe a hacker who has really good operational security, right? Because last few years he's a hacker, right? He wants to make sure he doesn't get caught. So he's doing everything right by the book to make sure he doesn't get caught. But the beauty of having massive corpus of historical data is you can essentially kind of pivot through time, right? So find that a username that he's using now, and then maybe find a account that they created 10 years ago when they had less operational security, and then from there find interesting information. So incredibly valuable for threat attribution. Pen test vulnerability assessments, so understanding what a corporation's kind of cyber vulnerabilities are. Executive protection is another great use case. So understanding how much of an executive's personal identifying information is out there that threat actors might have access to that people wouldn't necessarily assume is out there, right? An executive might go through a lot of trouble to obfuscate their real estate holdings or where their children go to school, et cetera. Maybe buy a house in the name of an LLC. Make sure they have, high security on all the things that they do, like, not post to Instagram, not post to Facebook, et cetera. But, one time they ordered, a pair of pants on Bonobos, or one time they ordered, a bottle of bourbon on Drizzly. Those websites got compromised, and now you have, the address of the vacation house, or, during COVID or even now, all these schools getting exposed. So now you know where the children go to school. So data that isn't out there except for in these compromised records. Of course, use it for dark web assessments for companies and individuals. Due diligence is another interesting use case. So just kind of learning more about a person, right? So you can, of course, learn new addresses for someone, new phone numbers, new emails, et cetera. But you can also learn a lot about a person by virtue of what websites they signed up for, right? If they're creating accounts on ultra right-wing forums, you can assume that they're have those tendencies, or maybe they have accounts on dark web marketplaces where drugs are bought and sold. You can make an assumption there, or they have an account on a weapons discussion forum, where they list, all the weapons they have in their bio. You can now, have a understanding that maybe they have access to weapons, stuff that might not show up in public records or even on their outside publicly facing social media profiles. And then just general kind of person of interest investigations. So looking at just individuals and seeing how you might be able to connect them to other individuals based on certain identifiers, interests, et cetera. And then litigation support is also another great use case that is coming up more and more these days. In terms of the types of breach data, right? There's not like kind of the most popular one and the most kind of known one, I guess, would be hack data sets, right? So when a company gets compromised, data is exfiltrated from there, shared on the deep and dark web. Oftentimes you'll have password information, username information, emails, other kind of related, maybe date of birth, other things like that. So very valuable information. Another type are scrapes. So this is, when individuals will scrape, massive or even smaller websites, scrapes of, Twitter, of VK, VKontakte, a Russian social media platform, classified ad sites, whole mix that can have interesting information, right? A lot of times when, you're writing a classified ad site, you'll put your phone number and your name in addition to what you're selling. So kind of scraping that information. Or, if you're scraping Twitter user information, you're going to get their Twitter ID, you're going to get their Twitter username, maybe their phone number, as was the case for an exploit of Twitter a few years ago. So, very interesting data can be gleaned from scrapes as well, even if it doesn't have passwords. Stealer logs, which will kind of go a little bit more in depth in this presentation, is also an incredibly interesting type of breach data. Essentially a type of malware that people unwittingly download to their machines, which then exfiltrates data from their browsers. So very interesting. Combo lists. It's essentially a collection or compilation of credentials from different hack databases in username, password, plain text password format. So not, let's say, the sexiest of breaches or data types, but can be really interesting if that's kind of all you have to go on. And of course, we're collecting that data as well. There are open buckets, individuals or organizations who fail to secure their data repositories, and that data is, taken by threat actors and then shared on the deep and dark web. And then you have kind of these other data sets you can kind of lump in with like public records and other things for municipalities and maybe cities and states that aren't as open as maybe the US is, so you might find, voter records in, Honduras, or, traffic stop records in Moscow from 2016 to 2019, just as an example of different ones that, we have in our own data set. And then we also have, these ransomware sites, right? That's obviously been like a big issue. These ransomware gangs essentially, encrypting and then exfiltrating has become like a trend over the last few years, data from organizations. And obviously there's a lot of, interesting PII mixed in there, right? There's also, a whole bunch of other stuff, but a lot of times there might be employee databases, customer databases, et cetera, which could be, very interesting. This is essentially what a hack database might look like. A lot of times it's, a SQL dump, right? So it's thousands of different tables that were dumped by a threat actor. So example, this is a user table that has, emails, logins, URLs, when they registered for the website, what their name was on the website. So, very interesting information. So kind of mentioned log stealer records before. So log stealer records have also known as stealer logs or malware logs. It's kind of been on the rise over the last 5 or 6 years in particular, but really driving up in the last 2 years, and it become like a really interesting data source and a way for initial access brokers to gain access to systems. And essentially, what it is it's a malware that someone will download to their machine, and it will basically look at every browser, web browser that's installed on the machine, and extract the saved credentials, right? Like when you go to log into a website, Chrome or Firefox or Brave or whatever, they'll ask you, do you want to save this password? You click yes, that'll get stored in your browser. These sealer logs, malware logs, and malware sealers will pull that information out. So that's going to be your authentication information with plain text password. It's also pulling out autofills. Same idea when you go to fill in a form, right? Like, and you're tired of typing your address over and over again, or you're tired of typing your credit card number over and over again. Google or Chrome or Safari or whatever might ask, hey, can we save this for you? You click yes, it's going to be stored in your browser. That's going to be exfiltrated, and it's going to be in these sealer logs. You'll also see browser history. Same idea. It's going to be stored in your browser, so that's going to be pulled out. You'll see cookie data, right? So you can see what cookies are stored on the machine, which will give you an additional sense of what websites they browsed. But B, threat actors can use that to essentially log into your account, right? Like for a lot of websites, it's not enough just to have your authentication information, right? Like your email and password. There might be a second factor authentication on there, whether it's an authentication application or a text where they text you the code, etc. But if you have access to their authentication information plus cookie data, which has all the cookie values, you can essentially take all that data plus there's other information stored in the files, like your screen resolution, your the local language on your machine, all that stuff, and input it into these specialized browsers. You can take all of those and log into an account, even if it has multi-factor authentication. So very, very powerful and interesting. So this is kind of what they look like. So each one of these folders is a machine. So TR, Turkey, oftentimes will start with kind of the two-letter country code. They'll have a unique ID, and then they'll have the date of what they are. This is the kind of data that you see in there, right? So we talked a little bit about this stuff already. So user information. So that's going to have, your IP address, information about your system, the keyboard language you're using, your location, where you're located, process list. These are all the processes that are running on your machine at the time that the malware was exfiltrating data. Passwords. Installed software, so looking to see what software is installed. So that becomes interesting if you're looking for, certain companies have proprietary software that only their employees have. So you can do a search for, if you know the name of proprietary software that just some company uses, do a search for that, and you can, boom, right away kind of see potentially, the whole machine of an employee that's there. Talked about cookies, autofills, file grabber. That's interesting. So just in addition to grabbing stuff from your browser, a lot of these seal logs will actually grab information or grab files from your desktop, from your documents folder, and put it in this folder. So obviously that becomes interesting if you find your person of interest in these sealer logs, then you'll be able to, essentially see the files that they have installed on, or they have on their machine. So it becomes very interesting. And then, yeah, here we have all the cookie data. And yeah, as I mentioned, these are the files. So here, this was someone who stored files on their desktop, and that data was pulled out. This is what the credential password file looks like. It's just the URL, the username, the password, and the application. So very, very straightforward, very easy for threat actors to abuse. This is what a system information file will look like. So you see stuff like, this is where the file location. So that's where the malware was downloaded to, the name of the machine, the country, zip code, the hardware ID, keyboard layouts, the hardware. So these are all things that a threat actor would put into these specialized browsers, essentially, this plus the cookie to get you that information. So here, this is what the cookie looks like. And they actually have the cookie values and the expiration date. So you can know, hey, this cookie's not expired yet. I can still use this to log into an account bypassing authentication procedures, as long as I have all this information. And then, of course, browser history becomes interesting as well. And a lot of times they'll actually include a screenshot of the machine as it's being compromised, kind of add insult to injury. So that becomes interesting as well. So where do you find these breach records? So a lot of them can be found in hacker forums, Telegram, kind of mentioned, open buckets. A lot of times, this data is relatively freely available, right? There's some famous hacker forums that, you might have read about on the news that you can just create an account for and start downloading data. There's other ones, that are more kind of closed, and obviously we're in both, kind of the closed and the open ones, where you need to have vetted access to. You need to be, suggested by someone else or referred by someone else or pass a test or whatever. And there you'll find more of the kind of more sensitive stuff, like right away, right? So a lot of this is trying to get this data as quickly as possible without waiting for it to go from, kind of the private stuff down to the surface, like kind of bubbling to the surface. So we want to make sure that we have that. So District 4 was essentially, created to manage all this kind of data, right? So we have this product called Darkside that is a compilation of all these different types of compromised record data sets, right? So the scrapes, the hack data sets, the combo lists, the log stealers, the public-ish records, the spam marketing lists, really anything with person identifying information. We're going to be pulling into our system because it's interesting, it's useful. And we're an American-based company, but really we have no US focus whatsoever. So we're looking at, and we're bringing in data from every country you can think of, and regardless, of how big it is, right? So a lot of organizations will focus just on the massive data sets. We are looking at data sets that have, less than 100 users. We have probably 1,000 data sets with just one user. Because at the end of the day, I think for the cyber threat intelligence use case where you're just trying to get a count, it's not as meaningful. But if you're an investigator, if you're law enforcement, if you're, really doing an investigation on a person, you might find, it doesn't it's going to be a big difference whether it's 50 or 51 records. If that 51st record has their passport number, bank account number, date of birth, family member information, etc. So for us, it's no database kind of too small. We're bringing in data, kind of was talking about threat attribution from the last 20 years. So for us, new information is obviously valuable, but historical information it's kind of worth its weight in gold, right? Especially when you're investigating a person of interest, just because you can kind of see, you can kind of pivot through time, right? And understand their full exposure. If you're doing a threat attribution case, their full identity by looking at data that might be 10 years old, but that might be, that data set from 10 years ago might be the only one that has their real name in it, for example. That being said, we're obviously adding new data in all the time. So we're in a lot of the forums and messaging channels where this data gets out there for the first time. So national public data was a massive compromise that affected pretty much every American. And we were there like on day 0 in the channel where it was initially shared, and we had it indexed and or parsed and indexed within a couple of days. So massive breach that we included in there. And yeah, our focus is really just on person identifying information. So not really user-generated content. We're not capturing data from forums, posts that people are making. It really is just different data sets. And in terms of how you can access the data, we obviously have our web application, which I'll show off, as we're looking for our threat actor today. We have a easy-to-use REST API, and then we have various integration platforms and partners as well. And kind of to the point of, kind of coming from an investigative mindset, we want to extract as much meaningful data as possible from every record. it's very important. Because it's not just a numbers game, right? It's not like, oh, how many records are returned? It's about producing and returning as much valuable data as possible. So a lot of times when you're looking at a SQL dump, right? SQL is a type of database, and a lot of companies store their data in SQL databases. So that means a lot of threat actors will dump these SQL databases. A lot of times you can have upwards of 2,000 different tables in a single SQL dump for a single company. And what we do is, because we're just very kind of obsessive with data, is we parse all 2,000 tables. Whereas other organizations might just parse the user table, the customer table. We'll look at the sessions table. So identifying every IP address that they ever logged in from. If they connected their accounts, right? At some point they connected their Twitter account, or they logged in with Google, or they logged in with Facebook. So we're going to get that Facebook ID, that Google ID, et cetera, and merge it into that same record. So it's just very important, very, very, very important to get as much data as possible. And here's, a good example. So, this is the same exact data set. One was parsed by another organization, and one was parsed by us. So you see here, obviously we have the same email address, the same database, because it's the same database, and the same name, but we also have, birth date information. We have password information, and you'll see here, we actually crack passwords, because it's, for us, like I mentioned, especially when you're doing a threat attribution case, you might have someone who is, really good with operational security and doing a lot of things to hide their identity, creating different email addresses, different social media accounts, different profiles, whatever. But, going in with the mentality that this data is all going to be, is private, they might use the same password. And they're counting on the hashing algorithm being good, but we're still cracking them. So this is a what's called bcrypt algorithm, difficult to kind of crack, but we're going for it. So then you can then search by password. So very valuable information. This person connected their Google ID, and this person had a bio. This person had a Twitter name. So all very, very, very interesting information that we're capturing and including. So that means you can search by this IP address. You can search by this Google ID. You can search by this password, and kind of this address, and get that information. So yeah, perfect segue. So essentially you can really search by anything you can think of that's associated with a person. So obviously a name, a username, including, social media handles. So we're pulling out and parsing all references to social media handles, whether it's, in a structured column in a SQL dump, or if it's in their bio, right? Someone on a compromised website, might have an account, and in their bio, or their, description or about section, they might say, hey, come visit me on my Twitter profile, and then provide a Twitter link. We're going to pull out that Twitter handle and put it in its own field so that it's incredibly searchable. Email domains, so there you can search for essentially an entire, company. So let's say you have whatever, johnsmith.com, search for that, and you'll see all employees who use, their corporate email addresses to create, accounts online. Phone number, of course, we're sort of searching for phone numbers, and there, we're very flexible in how we search. So, we're going to search for, with and without country code, with and without double domestic prefix, with and without domestic prefix. So you just have to do one search, and, we're punctuation agnostic. IPv6 address, email addresses, IPv4 addresses, CIDRs, actually, not on here, but, CIDRs are a range of IP addresses. So that becomes really interesting as well, especially if you're looking at an organization, right? A lot of larger organizations will have their own IP block that's relatively static. So what you can do is search for that range of IP addresses, again, just in one search, and essentially you'll get everyone who created an account while they were at work, right? So we had a really interesting use case where we were trying to identify FSB agents, found the IP range that, of the offices, And we were essentially able to find a whole bunch of FSB agents because we knew that they created accounts from the private network inside FSB headquarters. They're not creating a lot of times, sometimes they do, creating, accounts with their work email. So we're able to kind of find that information another way, which becomes very obviously interesting. Crypto wallets. So we're searching for a lot of, we're bringing in a lot of crypto wallets from data sources like online casinos, from dark web marketplaces. We have partnerships with human trafficking organizations who we sponsor, who kind of help us out as well, and they feed us lists of crypto wallets associated with human traffickers. So we'll have that data in Darkside as well. Just really, really valuable data. And you can go literally from crypto wallet to a full workup of a person in a couple of seconds sometimes. We don't have every crypto wallet. Obviously, it has to be a crypto wallet that was compromised, but it's great to be able to do those searches and potentially get attribute a crypto wallet to a person in less than 2 seconds, as opposed to kind of doing all the pivots across wallets, et cetera, and then eventually maybe figuring it out after getting a subpoena or something. You can search for addresses, residential addresses. I mentioned earlier, searching for plain text passwords, because again, we're going to search for them in the combo list as well as the passwords that we're cracking, the hash passwords that we're cracking. You have kind of these kind of advanced searches, I guess. So being able to search an email address, just a handle, but searching varieties of that email handle, right? So if I am, M Tomasini at district4labs.com, which I am, I might want to, as an investigator, if I'm investigating Matteo Tomasini, might want to search for all variations of that. So I might just do M Tomasini and then just, an asterisk and be able to search, because maybe I have M Tomasini at, IBM.com or M Tomasini at gmail.com, M Tomasini at Yahoo, M Tomasini at Hotmail or whatever. You can do that, or you can kind of go one step further and, add, make it wider, and be able to get results for M Tomasini 01 at Gmail, M Tomasini 75, M Tomasini 84, right? So a lot of people will just kind of do small variations of certain identifiers when they're creating new accounts. Same for alias, right? You do the same for password. So that's why we have in the password field, or the password search, the ability to use wildcards as well, because someone might use, their kid's first and last name, and then for every website put, the name of the website, like, John Smith, LinkedIn, John Smith, Twitter, John Smith, and we've seen that happen. Or variations of numbers after the term. So very interesting as well. And then you can also search for other social media IDs, right? So we talked about searching for social media handles with the username search. But as many investigators may know, for a lot of platforms, you can change your social media username or social media handle, but you can't change your ID. So for Twitter, you'll have your username, say John Smith, and you'll have a long integer that is your Twitter ID. Same for Facebook, same for Telegram, same for Weibo, same for GitHub, same for YouTube, same for a lot of different, same for VK. So we know that, and because we take the extra time to parse that data out from the dumps that we're examining, we're going to let you search for that. So you can search, in addition to searching for their Facebook handle, you would search for their Facebook ID. In addition to searching for their GitHub handle, you search for the GitHub ID. And down the way with Telegram, and kind of to the point that we have data from all over the world. We have social media platforms from all over the world, right? So VK, Weibo, QQ, VK, like Facebook, Tucapel, Tokopedia, like all sorts of different websites, different social media platforms rather. And so now kind of walk into this interesting use case. So, for those who you might have seen, Maxim Rudomitov was the operator, essentially the boss of the largest malware log stealer variant in the world. So we were talking about log stealers before. He ran Redline, which was probably the most common one, that and maybe Meta and Raccoon. They were kind of the three most common, but Redline was the most common one in the world. And, he was making hundreds of millions of dollars, selling this data, selling access to this data. So we're going to kind of pick on him to show kind of how Darkside was used to really learn a lot about him. So one of the things that, they knew from the beginning was that he went by the handle Dendemir. So now let's pivot into Darkside. Okay, so this is Darkside. This is obviously the user interface that we have. Before I kind of start with the searches, just kind of walk you around a little bit. So this is obviously our search page. We have our breach dictionary here, which will essentially show you all the different data sets that we've ingested. As you see here, we have, the number of records, the name of the database. You can click and learn more about each one. So this is a dating website. This is an American healthcare organization, Chinese insurance company, Jaguar, Jaguar, UAE Ministry of Education. So in addition to, kind of being able to get information in the database, also get a sense of the variety of data that we have. And kind of to the point of, no database being too small, you see here on this page, like we have, ones with 643 million records, next to ones with 922 records, right? I don't even know what this is. Argentinian construction materials e-commerce company. So, if you find your subject in there, that's great. That's another lead point. But we have obscene amounts of data from, smaller databases as well. And you can also, if you don't want to get a sense of like, okay, I'm looking at Indonesian subject, I wonder what Darkside has for Indonesian users. Just type in Indonesia or Indonesian, and then get a sense very quickly. Here you see one with, here 7 users. It's an Indonesian government website. But here, if you sort by, number of users, you see we have the ones with 91 million records, all the way down to the ones with 2 records for an Indonesian film supplier. So, very interesting data. All right, so now let's look at our subject. So let's go back to the search page. Here we have the different selectors that you can search by. Kind of went over them already, so I won't go into them again, but, everything you'd expect. So let's start with our alias of Dendemir. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have multi-field on, which means that it's also going to search for different social media handle fields, and I'm going to hit search. And this is all a live demo, maybe not a great idea, but I think hopefully she'll work fine. So right away, we're getting a lot of kind of interesting information. So here we have on our screen, obviously the search results, basic summary of the results. And then here we have some kind of facets that you can filter by. So you can filter by, when the breach was added to our Darkside, filter by the name of the database. Sometimes you might have hundreds of results from like one particular data set, especially if you're searching for a domain. Filter by the email domain, email, or the username. So here right away, and here I can also customize the columns a little bit. So let's see, address, let's add birth date, whatever. So here already you can kind of get a sense of who this person is. So crack.to, it's a hacking forum. I Like Cheats, Game Cheats website. LOL's team, a Russian hacker forum. NetGuard, a firewall application. So this is obviously a very tech-focused guy who, is, involved in hacking activities. Here's an interesting one, right? All these other databases are in the hundreds of thousands of users. This one only has 12,000 users. Very, very small website, relatively speaking, but the world's largest malware operator happened to be in it. So, very valuable data, right? We can click here to see more information. So these are kind of the columns that are kind of there. But here we can get additional information that was in the record. So the email address, the username, what type of database it was, when it was breached, and then other fields, right? So, he was in Europe, Athens time zone. It's how many messages that he sent. And this is when he registered for the website, and this is the last activity of the website. So this is going back, what, 8 years? No, Jesus, 10 years. 10 years now. So interesting kind of data set to look at. And we look here and we're seeing, different email addresses that he has. So we have maxi1901 at yandex.ru, and then we have another one at yandex.ua. So, we could search both, one after the other, or we can just, see that he uses the same handle, but a different email domain, right? Yandex UA versus yandex.ru. So let's just, instead of searching by the email, let's search by the email handle. So we're going to pivot here, very quickly. And this is giving us a lot more results, which is obviously great, right? We want to, have as much data as possible. So we're going to present all that data to you. Let's filter out the combo list, right? Like I mentioned, combo list can be interesting if that's all you have to go on. But a lot of the times, it's really only useful if you don't have someone like us cracking the passwords. So let me just filter those 91 results out, and let's see what we're left with. Left with a lot of interesting data here. And already you're getting a good sense of who they are. Let's filter out the Dendemir stuff as well, because we've already looked at it. Okay, so now it's become a little bit more manageable to kind of look at. So here, we're also getting a sense of what this person's interests are, etc. We're seeing another account on this Russian hacker forum that, so there's at least 2 accounts on there. Mathway, so this is a math website. So, all right, education, Sportmaster, it's a Russian sports store, and you're seeing, interesting stuff right here. So like right away, now we have his date of birth. So we went from a username of, the, world's most notorious malware operator, to a username. We got 3 email addresses, and then here we have his date of birth, which this is his actual date of birth, a phone number, an address, some registration information. And you see here like other names that this person has used. So this is his name, Maxim Rudimov in Cyrillic. So, right away, you're obviously getting a lot of information about him. Twitter. So this person has a Twitter account, and he's using the Twitter name Wildchester M and the name Kitty, right? If you're doing an investigation and you're looking at this Twitter account, there is no way in the world that you could connect it to the world's most notorious malware operator. You have to have these compromised records in order to make that kind of realization and understanding. Here we have another hacking website. Like, okay, this is, getting interesting. This is nice. We have, address information, birthday information. We know his name. We know other usernames that he's used, other aliases that he's used, even ones that aren't associated kind of with him at all. So like, okay, now let's pivot on this username. So he seems to use this username a decent amount, ghack ihg. So let's pivot on that. Okay, so interesting here. So now we have kind of like a new mix of stuff. So to kind of to the earlier point, how we're collecting all sorts of data, not just stuff with passwords. These are GitHub logs. I found a tranche of like 1 billion GitHub logs on some, deep web forum, and there's no passwords in here, but it has information about GitHub users, right? And it just so happens that this individual is in there. He had an account on GitHub, under this username, GitHub username, which we know is associated with him. It's a relatively uncommon username, right? We're not getting hundreds of millions of results in here. We're seeing the different projects or repositories that he's collaborated on. So, just to kind of show, like, this is more than just kind of hack databases. And now let's kind of look at what else we have here. So we have this Russian version of Quora, very interesting. Look more information. So we see an IP address, see a hash password. So this one we cracked, right? So this is the password that he used. We were able to crack it. Here we can kind of take out all of them, and we see he uses relatively complex passwords, but you can almost see a little bit of a pattern here. So you can use that, you can exploit that later on. And with Kinocom, again, we have another, we found like 3 accounts on this one website. And here you have a new email address, right? Which can be interesting as well. But let's, look at this phone number. So here we have a phone number. Now let's pivot on this. Again, let's kind of use this pivoting feature inside Darkside to do some additional searches. So here we have the PIAD record, which we've kind of already found, but we have this additional record from Yandex Food, right, which is a Russian food delivery service, kind of like Grubhub, Seamless, etc. We have his name, which we kind of already knew already. A phone number, which we pivoted on. Notice that this one has the plus, this one doesn't have the plus. If it didn't have the country code, we would have found it regardless, right? Because again, in the notion of being as flexible as possible with our searches, whenever you do a search, you're searching with and without country code, with and without domestic prefix, with and without double domestic prefix, with the idea being that if you are a Chinese company and you're storing phone numbers of your users, you might not put the Chinese country code in there because you assume that everyone in there is from China. So they might store the data that way. Or if you're American website, like Facebook or whatever, if you have Chinese users, you're probably going to store it with the Chinese country code because they're Chinese users. So this phone numbers can be stored a whole bunch of different ways. Fortunately, unfortunately, whatever. So we understand that. So we're gonna make that search as efficient as possible. The idea is, we have tens and tens of billions of records, but who cares if you can't even get to that data? So we want to make sure that you can get to that data. So looking at this Yandex food breach, it's quite interesting, right? We have the phone number, we have the user ID, user agent string, so we're capturing that as well. So here he was, getting food delivered from his iPhone. So we know he has an iPhone, which is, kind of interesting. Latitude and longitude, so down to 6 decimal places, so very strong. And here we have his address. And I can't read Cyrillic, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of copy this and then translate. And you see here, I don't know if it's showing up on the screen. Is it showing up? Maybe not. But the Russian translation essentially is, hey, this is how you enter my house. You need to knock at this gate. There'll be a security guard. Call them. They'll open the gate. After you enter the yard, go to the end of the courtyard. On the left side is my main entrance, and the door code is 83. So not only do you have this, again, the most notorious ransomware operators address, you have instructions on exactly what door is his, how to get there, what the door code is, for this address, and there's another door code here. Just very, 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 very powerful, very interesting. And you can kind of continuously kind of pivot. So if we go back to, for example, this email address, where we have, this interesting information, we mentioned kind of these passwords before. Let's pivot on this password. Again, so you just never know. And again, let's filter out the combo list. And because we're cracking so many passwords, so we have this one, right? The Maxi 1901, we saw that already, Yandex UA, Yandex at RU, but he used the same password for this completely different email address that he used to sign up for World of Warcraft, which is an online video game, in order to, I guess, play video games. And so, which is this, and then that's the thing, you can continuously pivot, right? So you pivot on this email address and you'll find a whole bunch of new social media platforms, a whole bunch of different identifiers. And so the idea is to, query this massive repository of data that has hacked databases, combo lists, scrapes, all sorts of data sets with PII, search in a very flexible way against data that's been parsed methodically, so that you can then, learn more about a person. So just in these last, 20 minutes of looking at this individual, this is kind of what, we're able to find out, right? We're able to find out all these passwords, all these phone numbers, all these email addresses, IP addresses, address, online accounts on GitHub, VK, LOL's team, Google, Twitter, KinHub, Speciality, all these different websites, all these different usernames. And this is someone who is supposed to have amazing operational security, but because we have so much data, because we allow you to be so flexible in how you search it, you can essentially learn a lot about this person just by kind of looking and pivoting in time through our data. Um, and with that, I'll kind of leave it open for questions.
Thank you so much, Mateo. Our first question is, do you purchase records, breaches, and logos, or do you just download what is freely available? And are you communicating with TAs in order to get some of your breach data?
So we are communicating with threat actors to get some of our breach data. Kind of been in the dark web for 12 years or so, building different identities. We have developed quite a bit of a reputation. So have made, quote unquote, friends with a lot of threat actors, prominent threat actors, who give me, not, my personas and, people at my organization at District 4's personas access to this data for free that they otherwise sell to other people. So that's kind of the nice thing is we don't have to buy data because a lot of the time we're getting data that is being sold for free, which is quite nice. So in a sense, the data is freely available, but we're getting it directly from the threat actor. So it's a lot of stuff that you're not going to find posted freely on, breach forums or XSS or, dark forums or whatever. And we're looking, like I mentioned kind of earlier, like obviously we're on those sites. We're also on a lot of the more, I guess, hidden forums that are out there, as well as kind of the invite-only Telegram channels where, a lot of this data has kind of moved to, even in spite of, kind of recent crackdowns. It's still there. It's just become a bit harder to find. But because we've been at this for so long, we're getting into those places. So we're getting this data just because, yeah, it's just so incredibly valuable.
So I believe the follow-up question to that is, so you do not buy any at all?
Correct. So we do not buy any data. We try to be as, I think technically, we might legally be able to buy data, but we just don't want to potentially have any issues with accidentally giving money to a terrorist organization or any potential issues that could come up that way. So we don't, out of an abundance of caution, we do not buy data.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next question is, can you discuss the legalities of using this kind of data?
Sure. So I see perfectly kind of dovetailing from the previous question. So I think, this data has kind of a bit of a mystique and kind of reputation kind of about it, right? So at the end of the day, it's not all hack data, right? We mentioned that there's like 6 or 7 other different data sources, but the hack data is certainly, it used to be grayer, right? Maybe 10 years ago when I started collecting this data, it was a bit grayer in terms of its usage, in terms of restrictions around it, et cetera. But there's been a realization over the last, especially like 5 or 6 years, that this data is just so incredibly valuable to law enforcement, to corporate investigations, to cyber threat hunters, that and this data is being used by the bad guys, right? Threat actors are using this data, they have access to this data, et cetera. So the notion is, if bad guys have access to it, why shouldn't the good guys, right? Especially if it makes you, much more efficient in your investigations, and a lot of times not just more efficient, but successful, right? It's the only path to success in a lot of cases. So the Department of Justice and other, kind of related bodies have been issuing guidance on how you can collect this data, how you can store this data, who you can offer this data to. And we're following all that guidance, right? So, we are, selling to law enforcement, to national intelligence, to private investigators, to law firms that, need to make sure that, we're collecting this data in legal ways, that we're not breaking any laws. We're fully GDPR compliant. And yeah, at the end of the day, we're not taking any risk because our clients expect us not to.
Thank you so much. The next question is, has there been any issues with using your data in court cases?
No, no. In fact, it's been used for quite a few breach litigation cases. personally by myself as an expert for breach litigation cases. We have it being used to indicate how someone was identified. So in different jurisdictions, how they're able to track down a hacker, a threat actor, et cetera, being able to say, hey, we, searched this email address and found it in this, compromised data set. We then search for this. So kind of outlining the methodology of how they're able to associate, kind of how we did here with, with Maxime, how we're able to identify Dendemir was Maxime, and then all these other identifiers associated with them. They used this data, right? This kind of data to identify more about him. So yeah, long story short, no. But I have to always have the caveat with kind of the previous question and this question. Just because it's legal, obviously everything's good. Like your organization might have different standards on how this data can be used or whether it can be used. So of course, check with your own legal counsel or whoever's in charge of this kind of stuff.
Thank you, Mateo. I believe our last question is, can this data be used in a prosecution for linking suspects to a crime, or would it just have intelligence capabilities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Kind of to the point was making in the previous answer. Yes, this data is often used to link threat actors to identifiers to a crime. Just because a lot of the time it's the only way you can make that link, and again, make it efficiently, right? Like for Maxime, it's not on here, but we're able to pull his bank accounts, right, from Russian bank account number. So understanding where his assets are stored, able to identify vehicles that he owns, again, kind of asset stuff, able to identify his participation in certain forums that are, very much more criminal than what I showed you. So it's definitely used to link threat actors to or identifying threat actors and seeing kind of their whole online presence. And it's being able to do it quicker and faster, right? The time it would take to figure out, where Maxime has a bank, much less what that bank account number is. Like, I don't even know how you would, I mean, maybe some people on this call would know how to do it, but I wouldn't even know how to do that without this kind of data or without it taking 2, 3, 4 months to get that information.